right.
Here we are once again. Welcome, Chattanooga, and anywhere else that you may be tuning in to the Footnotes from.
So Footnotes is a ministry of Cornerstone Apostolic here in Chattanooga. We take and reflect on the message that was preached just last weekend. So won't you join in with us and let's have a little fun.
Yeah, we'll start, make sure, we want everybody to know that you can watch those messages and see old sermons and previous sermons, et cetera, at our website, cachattanooga.org. Want to make sure that you get a chance, go check us out, check out all the awesome things that are happening at CAC.
That's right. And so what we'll do tonight is we're just going to dive in. I'm Dan Gibson.
And I'm Vandy Watt.
And we're going to just dive into what was being talked about. Brother Sam Pastor Sam, let me say it that
Pastor
way.
Sam.
But he was talking about by faith. That was the message title. And, I think just he brought a very good, timely message in our day and time with men, because it being Father's Day, directing it at men. I think it's very important that as men, he brought up the fact that, from the fall of man, we were all given an apple,
right?
And that apple represented that we were trying to bring paradise back to the people, or back to our families.
Yep.
So, it's just it was so good, so good.
Yeah, it was great, because preaching and speaking about manhood in 2024 and this day and age in general, whether it's 2024, 2023, et cetera, is always a challenge. Mm-hmm. Just because there's so many different ways that things could be misinterpreted, and so I thought he did a fantastic job of making sure to dive those things and drive home some of those same concepts. Especially, it's kind of funny, he mentioned and I know some people were kind of on edge a little bit because he was talking about the differences in men and women, and one of the things that he mentioned is that that he focused on a lot was that, like, there was this element of manhood that was awakened in Adam when Eve was introduced. Right. When God said, "Hey, look, you're acting," his exact words on Sunday were, Adam was acting like an adolescent teenager, and God wanted to have a conversation with him, but he couldn't. And so he's like, it's not good that you be alone. I'm going to bring somebody in that's going to stabilize you. Right. And any man that really values his spouse is going to acknowledge the fact of the changes that happened in them. I'll be the first to tell you, if you knew me 20 years ago before my wife and I met, I'm a totally different person than I was then, because of the simple fact of she brought a lot of balance into my life, and she brought a lot of things to my life that I couldn't do on my own. Exact words from Pastor Sam on Sunday is he said, what women can imagine can create a habitation. And I thought that was a very valid point that he was making, a very strong point that, it takes the family unit together to build on that.
That's right. Yeah. Just recently I heard something said about men and women. And that being said, there was, it talked about God being the man of the church. It is the male side of the church. And then you have the church itself is the female side, and how that they're there to nurture. And it is so interesting how that the two have their parts to play, and as a man in our household, there is a part, we want to tell the boy, hey, get up, brush it off, brush the dirt off, get up, but then there's a side that we have to have that nurturing side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I found an interesting article that supports those things. In 2016, the Pew Research Group, who does a lot of church studies, actually released something. It was republished in Washington Post. And it was looking at the differences in men and women and how they actually approach faith and the relationship with God, especially in the Christian church. They compared other religions too. If you really like a good, strong read, I encourage you to go read this article. You can search it up. Pew Research, Women and Men's Difference in Religious Faith. But it's interesting that one of the things that they found is that globally, more women than men identify with a religion. They say more women than men pray daily. More women than men say that religion is very important to them. Around the world, 83.4% of women say that they identify with a religion, and the difference is about 4 percentage points, whereas 79.9% of men say that they identify with religion.
Wow.
Which is really, really interesting when we begin to dive into this to say, hey, look, it's easier, whatever the cause is, whatever the theory, it's easier for a woman to give in, like that nurturing aspect. It is easier for a woman to acknowledge depth of relationship and growth in God than it is a man. Which, if we think about the gruff nature of, I'm the middle of 3 boys, and my dad did exactly that. He's like, hey, shake it off. My dad, great man, one of the most intellectual men I've ever known. But still, there was a nurturing component that had to come from my mother.
Yeah.
And as we look at this, and then we dive into, like Pastor Sam brought up Hebrews chapter 11 on Sunday, and he began to talk about the faith. And that's where it says, by faith, that's the faith chapter. If everybody recognizes Hebrews chapter 11 as the chapter of faith. I mean, it starts off, now faith is a substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. Begins to talk a lot about faith and identifies all these different individuals. Something I noticed when I went back and looked at this a little bit deeper after Pastor Sam's message on Sunday is you realize that not a single woman, I'm sorry, let me back that up. Only one woman is mentioned by name in what we call the heroes of faith.
Yeah.
Only one woman. Every other person mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11 by name is a man.
Wow.
It's a man.
Interesting. Which
I think is very powerful to help us understand. Look, as Pastor Sam was preaching Sunday, he began to talk about by faith, and he said, women, I'm directing a lot at this at the men, as we dive into this, by faith Abel, by faith Enoch, by faith Noah, by faith Abraham, all these names that we know of as being incredibly powerful and influential in the development and the growth of the biblical time, biblical faith, etc. It is not until he gets to Sarah in verse 11 that he mentions a woman.
Right.
And even in that moment, the woman was about producing the man that would be in the annals of history as far as being the development of God's fulfilled promise in Abraham. And I found that very, very interesting as we dive through this because, women, as the research proves, in that article that we mentioned, women are much more given to faith, whereas men, think about your own life. How many times have you been a show me and I'll believe it kind of guy?
Right.
Right. I think about my own. It's like, I want to see things. I want to experience things before I will there's something about Pastor Sam mentioned 4 things. I'm drawing a blank right now on all the 4 things, but it was about provision, responsibility, all these things. And all these things weigh very, very heavy on the mind of a man.
Yeah.
And so therefore, because it is all those things are on our minds, I think it's very significant that in what we view as the heroes of faith, it is by faith a man. By faith a man. In other words, the men had to actually overcome that so that they could start achieving and rising up to where they should have been.
Yeah. In our day and time, that is one of the biggest struggles that men have, is to be able to bring that spiritual aspect in. Hey, we're good at doing our job. We're good at working. We're good at providing for our family. When it comes to the spiritual things, we're not there. I'm reminded several years ago, I'm living in a house, and there's a house next to me, and we were. It was during one of our sabbaticals we had done, and this neighbor of ours had 2 children. There was a little girl, a little boy, and one Sunday we came home from church, and they were of a denominational world church, and we were living in South Louisiana. Let's just say that, and so the girl and her mother were at church. I walked out in the backyard after, and they'd gone to church, and I talked to him a few minutes, and he said, "Yeah," he said, they've gone to church. We're out here. We're taking care of the yard. We're doing yard work." And I thought, this is something that is missing. This is something that is missing, is that we are teaching our men, our young men, that this is what you do. It's accepted. And I want the world to know that it's our duty to be that spiritual leader.
Yeah. And the only way we can overcome that natural aspect and desire of man to constantly be working towards those 4 things that Pastor Sam mentioned in his message on Sunday is, that's our constant working. The only way we can overcome that is through faith.
Yeah.
By faith, look, I've got to put aside some of my own desires. I've got to put aside some of these things that I have always done, and that it's ingrained as a part of my nature. That's why I think it's very it's significant that by faith these men did this.
Yeah.
This went against every protocol. It went against every part of their nature. It went against every part of their being to do that. And then all we got to do is think about the old timers. How many churches, if you read about, even going back to the turn of the century and where there was this rebirth or reawakening of the filling of the Holy Ghost, you realize who the first person to experience that was.
Yeah.
It wasn't the men.
No.
It was a woman that was inclined toward that and said, there's something more here. And then the men followed. And then the men began to grow. And the men begin to work that. So, it's such an interesting concept when we look at this, is by faith, a man can overcome the nature.
Yeah.
By faith, this man can put aside all of these things that fight against them. Like if you read Hebrews 11, it's, hey, look, by faith, this don't make sense to walk around the walls of Jericho, but by faith they do. Like, it finally gets to the point, and then near the end of chapter 11, they finally bring in a second woman. And it was a woman that said, hey, look, men, here's how you save our city. Like, I'm going to save you. You're going to go out and kind of do those things as she housed the spies and all that kind of stuff.
So interesting.
Yeah, it's so unique, but then it's so awesome. And I know I've kind of, I know I've kind of like controlled the conversation.
No, hey, I like it.
But in Hebrews chapter 12, okay, we've just heard this laundry list of people, most of which are the men. It goes on and opens up in Hebrews chapter 12, and it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight. And think about those things that men are carrying with them at all times. Like, we're surrounded by all these men that overcame their nature, overcame the weights. So just like they did, we can also be given that same access and same opportunity when we do it in faith and say, okay, lay aside every weight and the sins which we cling to so closely. Let us run with endurance the race that was set before us. It's so awesome. And then we look to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated on the right hand of the throne of God. In other words, when we as men, especially in today's culture, it goes against every part of our being. But when we exercise faith, we're already surrounded by the great cloud of witnesses. We become that great cloud of witnesses, and our own children then begin to see that. When they begin to see that, then their children have a baseline. It is a generational process of growth and development that goes beyond just where we're at right now. It's a decision and an action that will deepen and further everything that happens.
And, in breaking some of those cultural demons, if you want to say, those things that has held men back all of these years. Hey, we live in a day and time when men takes the front line. Take the front line. My.
That's a great. I mean, that's a great statement as we start to kind of wrap this up. Like, yes, men, like take the front line. Like, there shouldn't be churches that are, the prayer meetings are full of just the women in the church. There shouldn't be churches and there shouldn't be families where women are leading in spiritual things.
Oh, man.
Oh, it is the man. And when we begin to exercise that faith and we begin to step up into those faithful actions, God begins to turn up kingdoms that can never be done by the women in our lives. I love my wife, but there are a lot of things that she will never be able to step into because of the process of things.
So true.
But when we as men take the lead, we're supposed to be the examples and the spiritual leaders of our home, very much like Christ, as you mentioned earlier, was the man, the man of the church relationship, et cetera. Like, that's how we should be for our home, so that we can teach, preach, lead, grow, develop beyond just ourselves, but into future generations as well.
That's right. Wake up, men. It's been good to be with you today, and I know that there's a lot more that we could say, but sign in at cachattanooga.org and see what's going on with Chattanooga. See what's going on here in Chattanooga and here in at Cornerstone Apostolic Church. God bless you today.
Men, join in the fight.
Yes. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Good conversation.
Yeah. I like it. Yes, indeed.